She hid her pregnancy at work until she collapsed. Then the billionaire CEO discovered the baby was his. The glass conference room spun violently as Eliza Morgan clutched the edge of the polished table, her knuckles turning white. Important documents scattered across the floor like autumn leaves. The faces of board members blurred into a kaleidoscope of shock and concern. Morgan! Marcus Reed's voice seemed to come from underwater as he lunged toward her. Eliza! Her knees buckled beneath her as darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. The last thing she saw before consciousness slipped away was the alarm in her CEO's steel-gray eyes, the same eyes that had looked at her with such intensity 7 months ago, on the night that had changed everything. When she awoke in the sterile hospital room, the steady beep of monitors counting her heartbeats, she heard his voice again, sharp with disbelief. Pregnant? She's pregnant. Yes, the doctor replied, approximately 16 weeks along. The secret she'd guarded so carefully had been exposed in the most dramatic way possible. Now Marcus Reed, billionaire founder of Pinnacle Innovations and the unwitting father of her child, was about to discover that their one night together had created far more than just an awkward workplace dynamic. Why didn't you tell me? He would demand hours later, his voice tight with controlled emotion, and the answer that had seemed so logical for months would suddenly sound hollow, even to her own ears. Hi, my beautiful sisters. This story touches on something many of us have faced, the impossible balancing act between our professional ambitions and personal lives. We're often told we must choose, sacrifice one for the other, or hide parts of ourselves to be taken seriously in the workplace. But your worth isn't diminished by your womanhood or motherhood. Your strength isn't measured by how much you can endure alone. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't pushing through by yourself, but allowing others to see your vulnerability and share your burdens. Remember, you deserve success without sacrificing your health, happiness, or authenticity. Your journey matters. All of it. And I hope this story reminds you that sometimes our most carefully constructed plans fall apart to make way for something even more beautiful. My name is Mr. Harrison, and today I'm sharing the remarkable story of Eliza Morgan, a brilliant strategist who thought she could control every variable in her life, until an unexpected pregnancy and a dramatic workplace collapse forced her to confront the one equation she couldn't solve alone. If you've ever hidden an important part of yourself to protect your professional image, or pushed your body beyond its limits to prove your worth, this story will resonate deeply. Give this video a like if you believe that sometimes our greatest strengths can become our greatest weaknesses when taken to extremes. 7 months before Eliza's collapse in that glass-walled conference room, she had been working late at Pinnacle Innovations headquarters. The city skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a constellation of lights against the velvet darkness. Most of the office had emptied hours ago, but the 32nd floor still hummed with energy, or more specifically, with the focused intensity of two minds working in perfect synchrony. There, Eliza tapped her pen against the whiteboard, satisfaction evident in her voice. If we approach the Meridian integration from this angle, we can exploit the vulnerability in their platform before they even realize it exists. Marcus Reed stood from his chair, moving closer to examine her work. At 42, the founder and CEO of Pinnacle Innovations carried his success like a well-tailored suit, comfortably, confidently, without ostentation. His presence filled any room he entered, not through bombast or intimidation, but through the quiet assurance of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he wanted. Brilliant, he murmured, studying the complex flowchart she'd created. Absolutely brilliant. Eliza tried to ignore the flutter of pride his praise evoked. After 2 years at Pinnacle, she'd earned her position as Director of Strategic Development through relentless work and razor-sharp insights. She didn't need validation, especially not from him. And yet, hearing appreciation from the notoriously demanding Marcus Reed felt like winning an Olympic gold medal. It's just pattern recognition, she said, downplaying her achievement. Meridian's architecture has fundamental flaws our Nexus platform can exploit. Don't do that. Marcus turned to face her, close enough that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, earned through years of intense focus. Don't diminish your work. What you've done here, he gestured to the whiteboard, is exceptional. You've just saved us months of development time and potentially millions in market advantage. The unexpected directness of his gaze made something shift in the atmosphere between them. For perhaps the first time, he wasn't looking at her as just another employee, another asset in his corporate arsenal. He was seeing her, truly seeing her, as an equal mind. "We make a good team, Morgan," he said, his voice rougher than usual, fatigue and something else threading through the words. "Eliza," she corrected, emboldened by the late hour and the heady rush of intellectual victory. "After 14 hours of collaborative genius, I think you can use my first name." His smile transformed his face, softening the sharp angles and revealing a glimpse of the man beneath the legend. "Eliza," he repeated, as if testing the shape of it on his tongue. The moments stretched between them, charged with something neither had anticipated. Later, Eliza would replay this instant in her mind countless times, wondering if she should have walked away. But in that moment, with the city lights painting shadows across his face, and the thrill of shared accomplishment humming in her veins, walking away seemed impossible. She never knew which of them moved first. Perhaps they both did, drawn together by the gravitational pull of minds that recognize something essential in each other. His lips found hers with surprising gentleness, a question rather than a demand. Her answer was to step closer, eliminating the last careful distance between them. What followed was both inevitable and impossible, a collision of minds and bodies that defied the careful professional boundaries both had maintained. One night of connection that left her breathless, exhilarated, and ultimately, alone in the morning light with nothing but a cryptic note on her desk. "Some equations have no elegant solutions." She'd understood the message perfectly. Marcus Reed didn't do relationships. His singular focus on building Pinnacle from struggling startup to tech industry titan was legendary, as was his aversion to anything that might divert his attention from that goal. The business press regularly speculated about his personal life, but the truth was disappointingly mundane. There was no personal life to speak of. Pinnacle was his life, his child, his legacy. Eliza had respected the boundary he'd drawn. She'd returned to her role with professional detachment, interacting with Marcus in meetings and project reviews with no hint of what had transpired between them. If occasionally she caught him watching her with an unreadable expression, she pretended not to notice. They had both agreed, without words, to treat that night as an anomaly, a momentary lapse in judgment best forgotten. Until 6 weeks later, 2 pink lines on a plastic stick shattered her carefully reconstructed equilibrium. The bathroom floor was cold against Eliza's bare feet as she stared at the pregnancy test, willing the result to change. This was impossible. They had used protection. She was on birth control. The statistical probability of both failing simultaneously was minuscule. And yet there it was. Undeniable evidence that the universe had a crueler sense of humor than she'd anticipated. "This isn't happening," she whispered to her empty apartment. "This cannot be happening." But denial, however tempting, couldn't change reality. 3 more tests, each from different manufacturers, confirmed what the first had declared. Eliza Morgan, whose 5-year career plan was mapped out with military precision, whose life operated on carefully calibrated schedules and risk assessments, was pregnant with her boss's child. The irony wasn't lost on her. She, who prided herself on anticipating every contingency, had failed to account for the most basic biological outcome of her actions. She, who had built her professional reputation on strategic foresight, had been blindsided by the oldest complication in human history. For days, she moved through her life in a fog of disbelief, mechanically attending meetings, responding to emails, and pretending that her entire future hadn't just been thrown into chaos. At night, alone in her apartment, she researched her options with the same methodical thoroughness she applied to market analyses. Termination was the most logical choice. She was 34, single, at a critical juncture in her career. The Nexus platform launch, her brainchild, her potential pathway to the executive suite, was 6 months away. A baby didn't fit into this equation. Especially not a baby whose father was her CEO. A man who had made it abundantly clear that personal entanglements had no place in his life. And yet, As the days passed and the initial shock receded, Eliza found herself increasingly unable to commit to that decision. Something shifted when she saw the tiny flicker of a heartbeat on the ultrasound screen at her first prenatal appointment. An appointment she'd scheduled just to understand all options, she told herself. Strong heartbeat. The technician had commented cheerfully. Everything looks perfect. Perfect. The word echoed in Eliza's mind as she left the clinic, the grainy ultrasound image tucked into her purse like contraband. Perfect wasn't a term she associated with this situation. Complicated, inconvenient, potentially disastrous. These were the adjectives that seemed appropriate. And yet, as weeks passed and the reality of her pregnancy settled into her consciousness, Eliza found herself making a decision that defied her usual logical calculus. She would keep this baby. She would become a mother, despite the complications, despite the potential career implications, despite the fact that Marcus Reed remained oblivious to the consequences of their shared night. The question of whether to tell him plagued her constantly. He had a right to know, ethically speaking. But what would that accomplish? He had made his position clear with that note. Some equations have no elegant solutions. Would he see this child as just another complication to be managed? Another variable disrupting his carefully ordered existence? More selfishly, what would disclosure mean for her professionally? Eliza had fought too hard for her position at Pinnacle to be reduced to a cliché, the employee who slept with the boss. She had watched other women in the company struggle to maintain their professional standing after announcing pregnancies. Diane from legal had returned from maternity leave to find half her clients redistributed. Melissa from marketing had been passed over for a promotion she'd been all but promised, the role going instead to a less qualified male colleague with fewer family commitments. No, Eliza decided. She would tell Marcus, but not yet. Not until after the Nexus launch, when her professional contribution would be undeniable, when she would have leverage and standing that couldn't be easily dismissed. 6 more months, that was all she needed. She could hide her condition for that long, maintain her professional momentum, secure her position. Then she would disclose everything and deal with the consequences from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. It was a perfect plan. Logical. Strategic. Exactly the kind of calculated risk assessment she excelled at. What she failed to calculate, however, was the toll this deception would take on her body. The first time Eliza fainted, she blamed it on the broken air conditioning. Summer in the city was brutal enough without being trapped on the 32nd floor of a glass tower that seemed designed to magnify heat rather than repel it. When she came to, sprawled inelegantly beside her desk with concerned colleagues hovering above her, she'd laughed it off. Just another perk of working in the world's most sophisticated greenhouse, she joked, accepting a paper cup of water from Tanya from accounting. But privately, the incident alarmed her. At 14 weeks pregnant, she'd been experiencing increasing fatigue and occasional dizziness, but nothing this severe. That evening, she researched pregnancy-related fainting spells, adjusting her diet and hydration accordingly. A minor setback, she told herself. Nothing that would derail her carefully constructed plan. The second time she fainted, 3 weeks later during a budget meeting, it was harder to dismiss, especially when Marcus Reed had been the one to catch her before she hit the floor. "Someone call an ambulance," he'd commanded, his voice cutting through the panicked murmurs of the marketing team as he lowered her gently into a chair. "No ambulance," Eliza had insisted once the room stopped spinning, mortification burning hotter than her fever. "I'm fine. Just low blood sugar." Marcus had studied her with those penetrating gray eyes that had launched 1,000 business magazine covers. "Take the rest of the day off," he'd said finally. Not a suggestion but a directive. "And see a doctor, Morgan." "That's not a request." She'd nodded, gathered her things, and fled the building, heart hammering against her ribs for reasons that had nothing to do with her medical condition. Had he noticed anything? The subtle changes in her body were still easy to conceal under loose blouses and strategic layering, but Marcus Reed was nothing if not observant. Had she just jeopardized everything with this physical weakness? The doctor's expression was a practiced blend of compassion and professional detachment, as she reviewed Eliza's vitals later that day. "Your blood pressure is concerning, Ms. Morgan," Dr. Patel said, making notes in her tablet. And you're showing early signs of anemia. Neither is uncommon in pregnancy, but combined with the fainting spells. She looked up, her dark eyes serious. You need to reduce your stress levels immediately. Eliza almost laughed at the absurdity of the suggestion. Reduce stress. As if it were that simple. As if she weren't single, pregnant with her boss's child, and desperately trying to hide both facts while leading a critical company initiative that could make or break her career. I have a major project launching in 6 weeks, she said instead. After that, I can take some time off. Dr. Patel's expression made it clear what she thought of this plan. Your body is sending you warning signals, Ms. Morgan. Ignore them at your peril. She scribbled something on a prescription pad. Iron supplements. Twice daily. And I want to see you again next week. Eliza took the prescription, making non-committal noises about following up. As she gathered her things to leave, Dr. Patel added, and Ms. Morgan? At 16 weeks, most women have already informed their employers about their pregnancy. For planning purposes, if nothing else. The gentle prompt hung in the air between them. I'll handle it, Eliza said, the words feeling like pebbles in her mouth. Thank you, doctor. Outside the medical building, Eliza stood motionless on the sidewalk, letting the summer heat envelop her like a heavy blanket. Tell her employer. As if Marcus Reed were just some distant HR figure who would dispassionately arrange her maternity leave. You look like hell, Vivian declared, sliding into the booth across from Eliza at their regular lunch spot 2 days later. Always the supportive friend, Eliza replied dryly, pushing her barely touched salad around its bowl. Vivian leaned forward, lowering her voice despite the restaurant's ambient noise. Seriously, Liz, you're pale, you've lost weight instead of gaining it, and according to Tanya, you nearly passed out in the elevator yesterday. Tanya needs to mind her own business, Eliza muttered, though without real heat. Tanya from accounting was the closest thing Pinnacle had to an internal news network. She's worried about you. We all are. Vivian's expression softened. You can't keep pushing yourself like this. Not in your condition. Eliza glanced around nervously, though there was no one from Pinnacle within earshot. Vivian was the only person who knew about the pregnancy, and even she didn't know the identity of the father. Some secrets were too dangerous to share, even with your oldest friend. I'm handling it, Eliza insisted. The Nexus launch is in 5 weeks and 4 days. After that, I'll tell HR, take my leave, figure out everything else. Vivian's skeptical expression spoke volumes. And what happens when you collapse again? But this time you crack your head open on the way down. Or worse. That's not going to happen. It already happened twice. I'm taking iron supplements now, Eliza countered weakly. Vivian reached across the table, capturing Eliza's restless hands in her own. Listen to me. No project is worth risking your health or your baby's. Not even one as career-defining as Nexus. The truth of her friend's words landed like a physical weight on Eliza's chest. She knew Vivian was right. The rational part of her brain, the part that had earned her an MBA with honors and propelled her through the ranks at Pinnacle, recognized the foolishness of her plan. But the part of her that had grown up watching her brilliant mother repeatedly passed over for promotions in favor of less qualified men, the part that had fought for every opportunity in an industry still dominated by male voices, couldn't bear the thought of being reduced to a stereotype. I've worked too hard to get here, Viv, she said quietly. If I disclose the pregnancy now, in the middle of the most important launch in the company's history, that's all anyone will see when they look at me. Not my ideas, not my leadership, just... She gestured vaguely at her midsection, where the loose cut of her blouse still managed to conceal her condition. You don't know that, don't I? Eliza's laugh held no humor. You remember what happened to Diane in legal when she announced her pregnancy last year? How suddenly she was protected from high-stress cases. How she came back from maternity leave to find half her clients redistributed. Vivian sighed, unable to refute the example. Marcus isn't like the partners at Diane's firm. He values talent above everything. Does he? Eliza wanted to ask, Then why did he walk away so easily? But that wasn't fair. Marcus hadn't known about the pregnancy when he'd left that note. He'd simply been doing what they'd both silently agreed was best, maintaining the professional relationship that benefited them both, preventing one night of weakness from complicating the corporate dynamic they'd perfected. 5 weeks, Eliza repeated firmly. That's all I need. Then I'll do everything by the book. I promise. Vivian released her hands, resignation clear in her expression. Just be careful, Liz. Some things can't be planned or controlled, no matter how detailed your strategy. As if to punctuate her friend's warning, Eliza felt a flutter deep inside her abdomen, the first definitive movement of the life growing within her. A life that, like Vivian said, couldn't be planned or controlled, only adapted to. 5 more weeks. She could do this. 3 weeks before the Nexus launch, Marcus Reed called Eliza into his office. She'd managed to avoid direct interaction with him since the fainting incident, communicating through emails and team meetings where his attention was divided among multiple people. But there was no avoiding a direct summons from the CEO. His corner office occupied the top floor of the Pinnacle building, a minimalist space dominated by windows and a single massive desk that appeared to be carved from a solid piece of dark wood. Marcus stood with his back to the door when she entered, his tall frame silhouetted against the panoramic view of the city. You wanted to see me? Eliza kept her voice steady, professional, ignoring the way her pulse quickened at the sight of him. He turned, and she was struck again by the intensity of his gaze, the way his eyes seemed to see past surface pretenses to the core of things. Had he always looked at her this way, or was it new since that night? The board has concerns about the Nexus timeline, he said without preamble. Specifically, whether we're pushing too aggressively given the complexity of the integration. Eliza felt a flicker of alarm. The launch date had been her recommendation, based on months of market analysis and competitive intelligence. The timeline is ambitious but achievable, she replied. Delaying would give Meridian Systems time to address the vulnerabilities in their platform that Nexus exploits. Marcus nodded, moving to sit at his desk. That's what I told them. But they want reassurance from the architect of the strategy. He gestured to the chair across from him. They've requested your presence at tomorrow's emergency board meeting. 8 a.m. Eliza remained standing, mind racing. A board presentation meant preparation, likely an all-nighter given the short notice. Her doctor's warnings echoed in her head, but the alternative, appearing unprepared before the board, giving them reason to doubt her judgment, was unthinkable. I'll be ready, she promised. Marcus studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. You've lost weight, he observed suddenly. The personal comment caught her off guard. Excuse me? You're thinner than you were 3 months ago. Pale too. His tone was clinical, as if he were assessing a technical problem rather than commenting on her appearance. Are you ill, Morgan? The use of her surname, a return to their pre-that-night dynamic, steadied her somehow. I'm fine, just focused on the launch. The company needs you at full capacity, he said, his gaze still uncomfortably penetrating. Especially now. I am at full capacity, she assured him, ignoring the irony of the statement given the life literally growing inside her. The board will have no concerns after tomorrow's presentation. He held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded once, dismissal clear in the gesture. 8 a.m. Don't be late. As Eliza turned to leave, she felt it again. That flutter of movement, stronger now, as if the baby were protesting the deception, or perhaps warning her of what was to come. The emergency board meeting was scheduled in the main conference room, a glass-enclosed space that occupied most of the eastern side of the executive floor. Eliza arrived at 7:30 a.m., determined to set up her presentation and center herself before the board members arrived. She'd worked until 3 a.m. preparing, fueled by herbal tea and determination, crafting a presentation that addressed every possible concern about the Nexus timeline. The result was comprehensive, persuasive, and, she hoped, would put to rest any doubts about her strategy. The conference room was empty when she arrived, the floor still quiet in the early morning hours. Eliza connected her laptop to the presentation system, arranged her notes, and tried to ignore the persistent dizziness that had plagued her since waking. She'd barely managed to keep down a piece of toast, her body rebelling against the lack of sleep and sustained stress. Just get through this meeting, she told herself. Then you can rest. At 7:45, the elevator chimed, and Eliza straightened, expecting to see board members arriving. Instead, Marcus stepped into the hallway alone, his expression darkening when he saw her through the glass walls. "You're early," he observed, entering the conference room. "I wanted to make sure everything was set up properly," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady as another wave of dizziness washed over her. Marcus glanced at her laptop, the presentation displayed on the main screen, then back at her. "The meeting's been moved," he said. "Upstairs in the executive dining room. Apparently, Whitfield wants breakfast served during the discussion." Gerald Whitfield was the board's most senior member, a venture capitalist who'd backed Pinnacle in its earliest days. His preferences tended to become requirements. "Oh," Eliza tried to process this change through the fog that seemed to be descending over her thoughts. "I'll need to move my setup." "Leave it," Marcus said. "IT can handle the transfer. We should head up now. Whitfield is already on his way." Eliza nodded, gathering her notes with hands that felt oddly disconnected from her body. The room tilted slightly as she stood, and she gripped the edge of the conference table to steady herself. "Morgan," Marcus's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" "Fine," she managed, though the word emerged slurred. "Just need to." The room tilted again, more severely this time, and Eliza felt herself falling, papers scattering from her hands like startled birds. The last thing she registered before darkness claimed her was the alarm in Marcus Reed's eyes as he lunged toward her, too late to prevent her collapse. Consciousness returned in fragments. The antiseptic smell of a hospital room, the rhythmic beeping of monitoring equipment, the murmur of voices nearby. Eliza kept her eyes closed, trying to orient herself before facing whatever came next. Stable now, but it was a close call. A woman's voice, professional, likely a doctor. The combination of severe anemia, dehydration, and exhaustion triggered the collapse. Given her pregnancy, it could have been much worse. "Pregnancy?" Marcus's voice, sharp with surprise. "She's pregnant." A pause, then, "Yes. I assumed you were aware, given your position as her emergency contact." "I'm her employer," Marcus replied, his tone carefully neutral but with an undercurrent of shock. "She never disclosed this information." Another pause, longer this time. "I see. Well, Ms. Morgan is approximately 16 weeks pregnant. The fetus appears healthy despite her condition, but she'll need significant lifestyle changes to ensure it stays that way. Bed rest for at least a week, followed by a reduced workload, regular medical checkups, and proper nutrition." "I understand," Marcus said, and something in his voice made Eliza finally open her eyes. He stood with his back to her bed, shoulders rigid beneath his perfectly tailored suit, speaking quietly with a middle-aged doctor near the door. Neither had noticed that she was awake, giving Eliza a moment to absorb the reality of her situation. Her secret was out, not revealed carefully on her own terms after a successful product launch, but exposed in the most dramatic and unprofessional way possible. "The most critical period is the next 48 hours, the doctor continued. "We need to get her blood pressure stabilized and her iron levels up. After that, assuming no complications, she can continue the pregnancy with proper care and significantly reduced stress." Marcus nodded, his profile severe in the harsh hospital lighting. "And if she doesn't reduce the stress?" The doctor's expression grew grave. "Then we're looking at potential placental abruption, preterm labor, or worse. Ms. Morgan has been pushing her body beyond its limits. That cannot continue if she wants a healthy outcome for herself and the baby." Eliza closed her eyes again, a wave of shame washing over her. How could she have been so foolish, so reckless with not just her own health but that of her child? Vivian had been right. No project, no career advancement was worth this risk. I'll make sure she understands the severity of the situation, Marcus was saying, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone he used when directing his executive team, though now tinged with something that sounded almost like concern. She's awake now, if you'd like to speak with her, the doctor replied, and Eliza realized her pretense of sleep hadn't fooled the medical professional. Try not to agitate her. Her blood pressure is still higher than I'd like. Footsteps approached the bed, and Eliza steeled herself before opening her eyes again. The doctor offered a professional smile. Ms. Morgan, I'm Dr. Winters. You're in Good Samaritan Hospital. You collapsed at your workplace approximately 4 hours ago due to a combination of anemia, dehydration, and exhaustion. How are you feeling now? Embarrassed, Eliza admitted, her voice raspy. And thirsty. Dr. Winters poured water from a pitcher beside the bed, helping Eliza sit up slightly to drink. Embarrassment is the least of your concerns right now, she said firmly. Your body is telling you very clearly that it cannot sustain your current lifestyle while supporting a pregnancy. You need to listen. Eliza nodded, unable to meet Marcus's gaze as he stood silently at the foot of her bed. I understand. It won't happen again. Good. Dr. Winters made a note in her tablet. I'll be back to check on you in an hour. The call button is here if you need anything before then. She glanced between Eliza and Marcus, perhaps sensing the tension. Try to keep the conversation calm, please. After the doctor left, silence filled the room like a physical presence. Eliza finally forced herself to look at Marcus, bracing for anger or disappointment. Instead, his expression was a complex mixture of shock, concern, and something else she couldn't quite identify. The board meeting, she began, professional concerns somehow still at the forefront of her mind despite everything, was cancelled, he finished. Apparently, the director of strategic development collapsing tends to disrupt the day's schedule. The dry observation, so typical of his usual communication style, somehow broke the tension. Eliza felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her throat, quickly suppressed. I'm sorry, she said, the words wholly inadequate for the situation. Marcus moved to the side of her bed, his tall frame casting a shadow across the white hospital sheets. 16 weeks, he said quietly. That's what, for months? Eliza nodded, her mouth suddenly dry again despite the water. Were you planning to mention it at some point? Perhaps when you went into labor during a client presentation. The edge in his voice was unmistakable now. After the Nexus launch, she admitted, I was going to disclose everything to HR once the platform was successfully deployed. Everything? He repeated, the word hanging between them. Including the identity of the father? And there it was, the question she'd been dreading since the moment she'd seen those 2 pink lines on the test 4 months ago. Eliza met his gaze directly, refusing to flinch from the truth any longer. That would depend on whether the father wanted to be identified. Marcus's expression shifted, a flash of realization crossing his features as he calculated the timeline. For months, he said slowly. That night in the office, after the meridian analysis. Yes. He turned away abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the hospital parking lot. For several long moments, he stood in silence, hands clasped behind his back in the posture Eliza had seen countless times during tense negotiations or difficult business decisions. Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked, still facing the window. The question was so vast, with so many possible answers, that Eliza struggled to find the right words. At first, I wasn't sure about any of it. Whether I would continue the pregnancy, what it meant for my career, for my life. She paused, gathering her thoughts. And then, after I decided to keep the baby, I didn't want it to change how you saw me professionally. I didn't want to be just another complication in your life. Marcus turned back to face her, his expression softened by something that might have been understanding. So instead, you worked yourself to the point of collapse, risking your health and the baby's all to prove. What exactly? That you could handle everything alone. Put that way, her decision seemed not just reckless but arrogant. I thought I could manage until after the launch, she said quietly. I thought my body would cooperate with my timeline. Your body, Marcus observed dryly, appears to have other priorities. Despite everything, Eliza felt a smile tug at her lips. So I've discovered. Marcus moved back to her bedside, his expression serious again. The doctor was clear about what happens next. Bed rest, followed by a significantly reduced workload. But the Nexus launch will proceed without your direct involvement, he interrupted firmly. Your team is capable, and I'll personally oversee the final preparations. Panic flared in Eliza's chest. Marcus, please. This project is everything I've worked for. I can scale back, delegate more, but I need to be there for the launch. What you need, he countered, is to accept that circumstances have changed. The Nexus platform will launch whether you're physically present or not. Your health and the health of our child is not negotiable. Our child. The words hung in the air between them, the first acknowledgement of a connection that went beyond their professional relationship or even that single night. I never expected this, Eliza admitted, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her abdomen. Any of it. Nor did I, Marcus replied, his gaze following the movement of her hand. But here we are. Here we are, she echoed softly. A tentative knock at the door interrupted the moment. Vivian peered in, her expression a mixture of concern and relief at seeing Eliza awake. The nurse said I could come in for a few minutes, she explained, glancing uncertainly between Eliza and Marcus. I can come back later if... No, please, Eliza said quickly. Come in. Marcus straightened, professional mask sliding back into place. I should check in with the office. The team will need direction on the board's concerns. He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at Eliza. We'll continue this discussion when you're stronger. In the meantime, follow the doctor's orders. That's not a request. After he left, Vivian rushed to Eliza's side, grasping her hand tightly. You scared the hell out of me, she said, voice thick with emotion. When they called to say you were in the hospital. I'm okay, Eliza assured her, though the words felt hollow given her current state. Or I will be with rest. Vivian's expression turned serious. So, that was Marcus Reed leaving your room, looking very concerned. She hesitated, then asked directly, Liz, what's going on? The nurse mentioned something about your pregnancy being at risk. Eliza sighed, knowing it was time for the full truth. Viv, there's something I never told you about the baby's father. Vivian's eyes widened as understanding dawned. No, she whispered, glancing toward the door where Marcus had just exited. Marcus? Marcus Reed is the father. Her voice rose in disbelief. How? When? Remember that night I stayed late working on the meridian analysis? About 16 weeks ago. Oh my God. Vivian sank into the chair beside the bed, genuinely shocked. You and the CEO. The actual, literal founder of the company. She shook her head, processing this revelation. That's why you've been so secretive. That's why you were so determined to wait until after the Nexus launch. Yes, Eliza admitted. And now he knows. About everything. And... Vivian leaned forward, still visibly stunned by the news. And nothing yet. It's complicated. Vivian gave a slightly hysterical laugh. Understatement of the century. She ran a hand through her hair, still looking dazed. What happens now? It was the question Eliza had been asking herself since regaining consciousness. What did happen now? Her carefully constructed plans had collapsed along with her body, leaving her in uncharted territory. I rest, she said finally. I take care of myself and this baby, and I figure out the rest as I go. That doesn't sound like the Eliza Morgan I know, Vivian observed, recovering some of her composure. Where's the 5-year plan? The contingency strategies? Eliza smiled ruefully. Currently being rewritten. It turns out some variables can't be controlled, no matter how detailed your spreadsheets. As if in agreement, she felt a strong kick from within, the most definitive movement yet from the life she carried. A life that had already changed everything, forcing her to reconsider not just her professional priorities but her fundamental approach to existence. For someone who had built her career on strategic planning and careful risk management, the path ahead was terrifyingly undefined. But as she rested her hand where she'd felt the kick, Eliza realized that for the first time in her adult life, she was ready to embrace the uncertainty. Some equations, as Marcus had once written, have no elegant solutions, but perhaps they could find a way forward together, step by uncertain step. If you've ever had your carefully laid plans completely upended by life's unexpected turns, give this video a like. Sometimes the universe has other ideas about our perfect timelines, and the true test of character is how we adapt when control is no longer an option. 3 days later, Eliza was released from the hospital with strict instructions for home care and a follow-up appointment scheduled for the following week. To her surprise, Marcus was waiting in the hospital lobby when she emerged from the elevator, wheelchair-bound as per hospital policy despite her protests. "I thought Vivian was picking me up," she said, unable to hide her confusion. "Change of plans," he replied, offering no further explanation as he led the way to where his car waited at the curb, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. The drive passed in silence, Eliza too exhausted from the simple act of leaving the hospital to initiate conversation. It wasn't until the car turned onto an unfamiliar tree-lined street in an upscale neighborhood that she realized they weren't heading to her apartment. "Where are we going?" she asked, straightening in her seat. "My home," Marcus answered, his tone matter-of-fact. "It has the space and amenities you'll need for your recovery. Your friend Vivian packed some of your things. They've already been delivered." Eliza stared at him, momentarily speechless. "You can't just decide that for me," she finally managed. Marcus turned to look at her, his expression softening slightly. "The doctor was clear about your need for rest and monitoring. Your 4th floor walk-up with no elevator isn't suitable. My home has a dedicated guest suite on the main level, a housekeeper who can ensure you're eating properly, and enough space that we won't be constantly in each other's way." He paused, then added more gently, "It's a practical solution, Eliza. Nothing more." The use of her first name, rare enough to be notable, took some of the fight out of her. Still, she couldn't quite surrender her independence so easily. "For how long?" "Until your doctor clears you for normal activity. A week, perhaps 2. His tone made it clear the matter was settled as far as he was concerned. Too tired to argue further, Eliza leaned back against the seat, watching as they pulled into the driveway of a modern glass and stone house set back from the street behind a privacy wall. It was exactly the kind of home she would have expected Marcus to own. Architecturally significant, undoubtedly expensive, yet somehow restrained in its elegance. As the car came to a stop, Marcus turned to her again, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "This isn't how either of us plan things," he said quietly. "But I want you to know that I take my responsibilities seriously. All of them." In that moment, looking into his gray eyes that revealed more vulnerability than she'd ever seen from him before, Eliza understood that they were both navigating unfamiliar territory. Marcus Reed, the man who controlled every aspect of his business with masterful precision, was as unprepared for this situation as she was. "One day at a time," she offered, extending an olive branch of sorts. He nodded, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "One variable at a time." As he helped her from the car, his hand steady beneath her elbow, Eliza felt something shift between them. Not a resolution to the complex equation they now faced together, but perhaps the beginning of a new approach to solving it. The guest suite was more like a small apartment, with a bedroom, sitting area, and private bathroom, all decorated in soothing neutral tones. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a meticulously landscaped garden, currently bathed in late afternoon sunlight. "Mrs. Chun has prepared the room," Marcus explained, referring to his housekeeper. "She'll bring dinner at 6. Is there anything else you need?" Eliza glanced around the elegant space, so different from her cozy but cramped apartment. "No, this is more than enough. Thank you." An awkward silence fell between them. For all his decisive action in bringing her here, Marcus now seemed uncertain of his next move. It struck Eliza that for perhaps the first time in his adult life, he was in a situation with no clear protocol, no business strategy to follow. "I have some calls to make," he said finally. "Rest. We can talk more tomorrow." After he left, Eliza explored the suite, finding her clothes neatly arranged in the closet and her toiletries set out in the bathroom. Vivian had even packed her favorite throw blanket and the dog-eared paperback she kept on her nightstand. These small touches of familiarity in the otherwise impersonal space brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the past few days. Her secret exposed, her carefully constructed plans in ruins, her body betraying her with its physical limitations. And now, here she was in Marcus Reed's home, dependent on his hospitality, facing a future she couldn't predict or control. For someone who had built her entire identity around self-sufficiency and strategic foresight, this surrender to circumstance felt like failure. And yet, as she placed her hand on her growing abdomen and felt another flutter of movement from within, Eliza recognized that perhaps this was simply life's way of teaching her its most fundamental lesson. Some things cannot be planned, only experienced. Some journeys have no map, only a compass pointing toward what matters most. The next morning, Eliza awoke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the distant sounds of someone moving about the house. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. The unfamiliar room, the too comfortable bed, the silence so different from her apartment's constant city soundtrack. Then memory returned, bringing with it the full weight of her new reality. She was in Marcus Reed's home, pregnant with his child, her professional future uncertain, her carefully constructed independence compromised. A soft knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Come in," she called, sitting up against the pillows. Mrs. Chen, a petite woman in her 60s with a no-nonsense demeanor, entered carrying a tray. "Breakfast," she announced, setting it across Eliza's lap. "Mr. Reed says you need protein and iron. Eggs, spinach, whole grain toast, orange juice." "Thank you," Eliza said, somewhat taken aback by the elaborate meal. "This is very kind." Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly. "Not kind, necessary. Baby needs strength." She gestured to Eliza's middle with a knowing look. "You eat everything. I come back for tray later." After the housekeeper left, Eliza stared at the perfectly prepared breakfast, oddly touched by the thought that had gone into it. Had Marcus researched pregnancy nutrition, or simply instructed Mrs. Chun to prepare appropriate meals? Either way, it represented a level of consideration she hadn't expected. She was finishing the last of the orange juice when another knock came, this one more hesitant. Marcus stood in the doorway, dressed casually in jeans and a gray Henley, an outfit so different from his usual corporate armor that Eliza almost didn't recognize him. "May I come in?" he asked, uncharacteristically formal. "It's your house," she pointed out, "but your space for now." He entered, taking the chair near the window rather than sitting on the edge of the bed as a more intimate acquaintance might have done. The careful distance he maintained spoke volumes about his own uncertainty in this situation. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better," Eliza admitted. "The rest is helping." Marcus nodded, his gaze direct but not intrusive. "I spoke with your doctor yesterday evening. She's pleased with your progress but insists on at least 5 more days of bed rest before you can resume even limited activity." 5 days. Eliza couldn't keep the dismay from her voice. "But the Nexus launch is being handled," he interrupted firmly. "I've personally reviewed your presentation materials and briefed the team on your strategy. They're implementing exactly as you planned, with my oversight." "But, Eliza," his use of her first name stopped her protest mid-sentence. "Your work is brilliant. Your team is capable. The launch will succeed because of the foundation you've built. But it will proceed without your physical presence because your health, and our child's health, takes precedence over everything else. Even Nexus, our child." There it was again, that simple acknowledgement of shared responsibility that somehow changed everything. Not your pregnancy, not the baby, but our child. "I'm not used to this," she admitted quietly. To what? Not being in control. Depending on others. Especially. She hesitated, then finished honestly. Especially you. Marcus's expression shifted, something like understanding crossing his features. Because of what happened between us. The note I left. Yes. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, gaze fixed on some middle distance as he gathered his thoughts. That night, he began slowly, was unexpected. For both of us, I think. And my response the next morning was clinical, detached. Some equations have no elegant solutions, Eliza quoted softly. Yes. A rueful smile touched his lips. Not my finest moment of emotional intelligence. It was clear enough. Was it? He looked at her directly now. I meant that there was no perfect resolution to what had happened between us. We work together. I'm your CEO. The power dynamics alone make any personal relationship problematic. But I never meant to suggest that what happened was meaningless or that you were disposable. The admission hung in the air between them, unexpectedly vulnerable from a man known for his emotional restraint. Why are you telling me this now? Eliza asked. Because circumstances have changed. Because we're going to be parents whether we planned it or not. And because I think you need to know that while I may have handled things poorly, I never viewed you as just another complication in my life. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. For months, she had constructed a narrative around that night and its aftermath. Marcus, the emotionally unavailable CEO. Herself, the foolish employee who'd crossed a line and been summarily dismissed. That narrative had shaped her decisions, justified her secrecy, reinforced her determination to handle everything alone. But what if that story wasn't entirely accurate? What if her own fears and assumptions had filled in gaps that reality had left open? I don't know what happens next, she confessed. I had it all planned out. The Nexus launch, telling HR about the pregnancy, taking maternity leave, returning to a position I'd secured through undeniable success. Now everything's messy. Life usually is, Marcus observed, despite our best efforts to organize it. Says the man whose company runs with clockwork precision. A company is not a life. His expression turned thoughtful. I've spent 20 years building Pinnacle, focusing on growth metrics and market position to the exclusion of almost everything else. I've controlled every variable I could identify, eliminated uncertainties, created contingency plans for every scenario. He paused, meeting her gaze directly. And yet, here we are, facing the one scenario I never planned for. Parenthood, Eliza said softly. Yes. A complex emotion crossed his features. Fear, perhaps, or wonder, or some combination of both. I never expected to be a father. Never particularly wanted it, if I'm being honest. My own childhood was complicated. My parents' marriage was a business arrangement that produced an heir but little affection. I didn't want to replicate that pattern. The personal revelation surprised her. Marcus Reed rarely spoke about his past or his family. The business press had occasionally mentioned his privileged upbringing, his education at elite institutions, but the emotional landscape of his childhood remained largely unknown. And now, she asked, now I'm reconsidering many things. He stood, moving to the window to look out at the garden below. Including what kind of father I want to be. What kind of co-parent. He turned back to face her. What kind of man? The vulnerability in his admission created a strange intimacy between them, deeper in some ways than the physical connection they had shared months ago. This was Marcus Reed without his CEO persona, without the carefully constructed image he presented to the world. Just a man facing an unexpected future, trying to find his way forward with honesty and integrity. I don't expect anything from you, Eliza said, feeling it important to clarify this point. I made the decision to continue this pregnancy knowing I might be doing it alone. I'm not looking for a relationship or financial support or... I know, he interrupted gently. Your independence is fundamental to who you are. I respect that. But the fact remains that we're connected now, permanently, through this child. How we navigate that connection is something we need to determine together. The reasonableness of his approach, so characteristic of his leadership style, somehow made this surreal situation feel more manageable. They were, after all, two intelligent adults facing an unexpected challenge. They could approach this logically, find a workable solution, create a framework for co-parenting that respected both their needs. One day at a time, Eliza repeated her earlier sentiment, finding comfort in the simplicity of the approach. One variable at a time, Marcus agreed with the ghost of a smile. Starting with your recovery. Everything else can wait until you're stronger. As he moved toward the door, Eliza felt compelled to ask one more question. Marcus, why did you bring me here? Really? There are private nurses, home healthcare services, professional solutions that wouldn't have required this. He paused, considering her question with characteristic thoroughness. Because some responsibilities shouldn't be delegated, he said finally. And because, despite everything, I think we understand each other in ways few others do. That understanding might be the foundation we need to build whatever comes next. After he left, Eliza sank back against the pillows, processing their conversation. For months, she had feared Marcus's reaction to her pregnancy. Anticipated dismissal, legal complications, professional repercussions. She had never considered the possibility that he might approach the situation with the same thoughtful analysis he brought to business challenges, or that he might see their shared circumstance as an opportunity for growth rather than an unwelcome complication. It was, she realized, the first time since discovering her pregnancy that she felt something like hope, not just for her own future, but for their child's. Whatever happened between her and Marcus, whatever co-parenting arrangement they eventually established, at least they were starting from a place of mutual respect and shared responsibility. For now, that would have to be enough. The days of enforced rest passed more easily than Eliza had anticipated. To her surprise, Marcus proved to be an attentive but unobtrusive host, checking in regularly but respecting her privacy, ensuring her needs were met without making her feel smothered or invalid. Each morning, they shared a brief conversation about her health and the nexus preparations. Each evening, if she felt up to it, they ate dinner together in her suite, discussing business matters with the easy rapport of intellectual equals. They carefully avoided more personal topics, as if by mutual agreement establishing professional common ground before venturing into the more complicated territory of their shared future. On the fourth day, Dr. Winters visited for a checkup, pronouncing herself cautiously satisfied with Eliza's progress. Your blood pressure has stabilized, and your iron levels are improving, she noted, reviewing the results of the blood work drawn the previous day. The baby's heartbeat is strong and regular. I think we can ease some of the restrictions, though I want you to continue taking things very slowly. Define very slowly, Eliza pressed, eager for any increase in freedom. Short walks, limited screen time, no work-related stress. The doctor's expression made it clear these weren't suggestions. You can move around the house, perhaps sit outside if the weather's pleasant, but no returning to the office for at least another week, and even then only for half days initially. Eliza bit back her instinctive protest, remembering the fear she'd felt in the hospital when the doctor had outlined the risks of continued stress. I understand. Good. Dr. Winters packed away her equipment, then glanced toward the door where Marcus waited outside, having excused himself during the examination. Your employer seems quite invested in your recovery. The slight hesitation before employer made Eliza wonder how much the doctor had intuited about their relationship. He's been very supportive, she said neutrally. That's fortunate. Dr. Winters' expression remained professional, but her eyes held a hint of knowing sympathy. Support systems are crucial during pregnancy, especially high-risk ones. After the doctor left, Eliza tested her new freedom by walking slowly through the house, exploring the space that had been Marcus's private domain until her arrival. The architecture was modern but warm, with clean lines softened by natural materials, wood, stone, textiles in earth tones. Floor-to-ceiling windows in most rooms created a seamless connection between inside and outside, the carefully landscaped gardens visible from every angle. It was a beautiful home, but strangely impersonal. No family photos adorned the walls, No mementos or souvenirs suggested travels or hobbies. Even the bookshelves in the living room held volumes that appeared chosen more for their aesthetic uniformity than for personal interest, business biographies, architectural monographs, classic literature in matching leather bindings. The only space that showed signs of genuine habitation was Marcus's home office, where she found him on a video call, his back to the door. She was about to retreat when he spotted her reflection in his monitor and ended the call. "You're up," he observed, turning to face her. "Dr. Winters gave you the all-clear?" "For limited movement," Eliza confirmed. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. That was just the weekly update on Nexus." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Would you like to hear where things stand?" Eliza sat, grateful for the professional topic. "Please." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus briefed her on the launch preparations, detailing how her team had implemented her strategy with only minor adjustments. His grasp of the technical aspects impressed her. He had clearly taken the time to understand not just the business implications of Nexus but the underlying architecture that made it revolutionary. "The board is fully on board now," he concluded. "Your presentation materials were persuasive, even without your personal delivery." Whitfield actually called it the most elegant solution to market disruption he's seen in a decade. Pride warmed Eliza's chest. "The team deserves the credit. They've been working on this for months. Under your leadership," Marcus pointed out. "Don't diminish your contribution, Eliza. This is your vision they're executing." The acknowledgement meant more than she wanted to admit. Throughout her career, Eliza had watched male colleagues receive recognition for ideas that originated with women, had seen credit flow upward to executives rather than to the teams that did the actual work. Marcus's clear attribution of Nexus's success to her leadership represented the kind of professional respect she had fought to earn. "Thank you," she said simply, "for overseeing this, for making sure it happens the way I envisioned. It's the least I could do." His expression turned more serious. "Especially given that your condition is partially my responsibility." The reminder of their shared circumstance shifted the atmosphere, bringing them back to the personal reality they had been circling around for days. "Have you thought about what happens next?" Eliza asked, deciding directness was the best approach. "After I'm cleared to return home, to work?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering her question with characteristic thoroughness. "I've been thinking about little else," he admitted. "Professionally, your position at Pinnacle is secure. The success of Nexus will only strengthen your standing. The board is impressed not just with the platform but with the team you've built to support it." "And personally?" Eliza pressed, needing clarity on the more complicated aspect of their situation. "Personally," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "I believe we need to establish a co-parenting framework that serves our child's best interests while respecting our individual lives. I don't expect a romantic relationship, Eliza. That night was—" He hesitated, then continued with characteristic honesty. "Meaningful to me, but I understand it doesn't create an obligation for anything beyond responsible parenting." The candor of his response both relieved and, unexpectedly, disappointed her. What had she expected? That Marcus Reed, notorious workaholic and confirmed bachelor, would suddenly declare hidden feelings? That their one night together had meant more to him than a momentary connection? "I agree," she said, matching his professional tone. "A clear co-parenting arrangement makes the most sense." That said, Marcus continued, his gaze direct, "I want to be involved in our child's life, not just financially but as a present, engaged father. My own father was distant, more concerned with grooming an heir than raising a son. I don't want to replicate that pattern." The vulnerability in this admission touched something in Eliza. For all his wealth and power, Marcus Reed carried his own wounds, his own determination to do better than the generation before him. "I wouldn't keep you from your child," she assured him. "Whatever our personal relationship, our baby deserves to know both parents." Relief flickered across his features. "Thank you. I wasn't sure, given how long you kept the pregnancy from me, whether you wanted my involvement." "That wasn't about keeping you from the baby," Eliza clarified, feeling it important he understand her reasoning. It was about protecting my professional standing, about not being reduced to just the employee who got pregnant by the CEO. Marcus winced slightly at the blunt phrasing. Is that how you think I would have seen you? How the company would have treated you? I don't know, she admitted, but I've watched other women's careers derailed by pregnancy and motherhood. I've seen the subtle ways they're sidelined, passed over, protected from challenging assignments. I didn't want that to happen to me, especially not with Nexus so close to launch. Understanding dawned in his expression. So you plan to establish your success first, then disclose the pregnancy from a position of strength. Exactly. A strategic approach, he acknowledged with a hint of admiration, though perhaps not accounting for all variables. Like my body's refusal to cooperate with my timeline? Eliza smiled ruefully. No, that wasn't in my risk assessment. The shared moment of humor eased the tension between them, creating a bridge across the awkwardness of their situation. For the first time since her collapse, Eliza felt they were finding their way toward a new equilibrium. Not as CEO and employee, not as one-time lovers, but as two adults linked by unexpected circumstance, trying to navigate a path forward with integrity and mutual respect. We'll figure this out, Marcus said, as if reading her thoughts. One step at a time. One variable at a time, she agreed, finding comfort in what was becoming their shared mantra. As the days passed and Eliza's strength returned, she and Marcus settled into an unexpected rhythm of coexistence. Mornings began with breakfast in the sunroom, where they reviewed Nexus updates and discussed broader industry trends with the easy rapport of intellectual equals. Afternoons found Eliza resting in the garden or taking short walks around the property. Sometimes alone, sometimes with Marcus when his schedule permitted. Evenings were the most surprising development. Rather than retreating to his office after dinner as she had expected, Marcus often joined her in the living room, where they discovered a shared appreciation for classic films and obscure documentaries. These quiet hours, with conversation flowing naturally between professional topics and more personal revelations, created a foundation of friendship neither had anticipated. I never pictured you as a Hitchcock fan, Eliza commented one evening as the credits for Rear Window rolled across the screen. There's a lot you don't know about me, Marcus replied, his tone lighter than usual, despite our professional proximity. True enough, she studied him in the dim light. This man who had been her boss, her lover, and now her unexpected companion in the strangest chapter of her life. I know the public Marcus Reed, brilliant founder, demanding CEO, business visionary. But the private person? That's still largely a mystery. By design, he admitted. I learned early that privacy was a form of power. The less people know about you, the less they can use against you. That sounds lonely, Eliza observed softly. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering her comment. It can be, he acknowledged finally. But it's also been necessary. Building Pinnacle required singular focus. Personal relationships complicate that focus. And now, she asked, with a baby on the way, that's about as complicated as personal relationships get. A smile touched his lips, transforming his usually serious expression. Now I'm reconsidering many of my previous assumptions, including the idea that complications are necessarily negative. The admission, simple yet profound, suggested a shift in Marcus's thinking that Eliza found both surprising and oddly moving. This man, who had built his empire on control and strategic planning, was willingly stepping into the most uncontrollable, unplannable experience life offered: parenthood. My mother would say that the most meaningful parts of life are rarely the most orderly, she offered. She raised me alone after my father died, juggling her career as a professor with single parenthood. It was chaotic, sometimes difficult, but also filled with joy and discovery. Tell me about her, Marcus said, seeming genuinely interested. Your mother. The request opened a conversation that flowed well into the night, with Eliza sharing stories of her childhood and Marcus, more hesitantly, offering glimpses of his own upbringing. The cold privilege of old money, the pressure of dynastic expectations, the emotional distance that had shaped his approach to relationships. By the time they said goodnight, something had shifted between them again. Another layer of understanding established, another bridge built across the circumstances that had brought them together. The next morning, Eliza awoke to find an email from her doctor clearing her for a return to work the following week, with the stipulation that she start with half days and avoid high-stress situations. The news should have filled her with unmitigated relief. A return to normalcy, to independence, to the career she had worked so hard to build. Instead, she felt an unexpected ambivalence. The past 10 days in Marcus's home had created a strange bubble outside of regular life, a space where they had begun to know each other as people rather than as professional entities. Returning to Pinnacle meant facing the reality of their situation in the corporate context, the whispers, the speculation, the inevitable restructuring of their professional relationship. She was still contemplating this when Marcus knocked on her door, tablet in hand. "Good news," he said, entering at her invitation. "The Nexus launch is officially scheduled for next Wednesday. Your team has completed all testing protocols with exceptional results. We're ready." "That's wonderful," Eliza replied, genuinely pleased despite her mixed emotions about returning to work. "They've done an amazing job. They've followed your blueprint perfectly." Marcus sat in the chair near her bed, his expression turning more serious. "Which brings me to a question. How do you want to handle your return to the office?" Eliza appreciated the directness of his approach. "What do you mean, exactly?" "I mean that your pregnancy will be visible soon, if it isn't already. People will talk, speculate, draw conclusions." He met her gaze steadily. "And given your position and mine, those speculations could affect how you're perceived professionally." The concern at the heart of her original decision to hide her pregnancy, now acknowledged directly by the very person she'd been hiding it from. The irony wasn't lost on her. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "That we control the narrative," Marcus replied, his strategic mind clearly engaged. "Rather than letting rumors dictate how our situation is perceived, we establish the framework ourselves." "And what framework would that be?" Marcus leaned forward, his expression earnest. "The truth presented on our terms. That we're expecting a child together. That while we're not in a romantic relationship, we're committed to co-parenting and to maintaining our professional responsibilities to Pinnacle. That your position and authority within the company remain unchanged, supported by the success of Nexus and your leadership of the Strategic Development Division." The proposal was both straightforward and revolutionary, a complete rejection of the corporate culture that typically pushed pregnancy and parenthood into the shadows, treating them as inconvenient personal matters best kept separate from professional identity. "You don't think it will undermine my authority?" Eliza asked, voicing her deepest fear. "Or yours, for that matter?" "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that we have an opportunity to model a different approach, one that acknowledges that employees, even executives, have full lives that include both professional achievement and personal milestones. One that demonstrates that parenthood and leadership aren't mutually exclusive." The vision he outlined was compelling, even inspiring, but Eliza couldn't help wondering about the practical realities. "And the board? The investors? They'll just accept this unconventional arrangement." "They'll follow my lead," Marcus said with the quiet confidence that had built Pinnacle from startup to industry leader, "especially with Nexus demonstrating the value of your leadership. Results speak louder than traditional expectations, Eliza. Always have, always will." His faith in her professional value, his willingness to use his own considerable influence to protect her standing, touched something deep within her. For months, she had feared that disclosure of her pregnancy would diminish her in Marcus's eyes, reduce her to just another female employee whose biological reality interfered with business priorities. Instead, he was offering partnership. Not romantic, perhaps, but a genuine alliance based on mutual respect and shared purpose. It was more than she had dared to hope for when those two pink lines had appeared on the pregnancy test 4 months ago. "Okay," she said finally, "let's do it your way. Control the narrative." Relief flickered across his features. "Thank you for trusting me with this. I know it hasn't been easy, given how things started between us." The acknowledgement of their complicated beginning created an opening for the question that had been lingering in Eliza's mind for days. "Marcus, can I ask you something? About that night?" He nodded, his expression open but guarded. "Of course. Why did you leave that note? Some equations have no elegant solutions. What did you really mean by that?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering her question with characteristic thoroughness. "I meant," he said finally, "that I didn't see a way forward that wouldn't complicate or potentially damage what we both valued. Our professional relationship, your career trajectory, the dynamic we'd established as colleagues. I thought a clean break was the kindest option. And now," Eliza pressed, "do you still believe there's no elegant solution to this?" She gestured vaguely between them, encompassing their shared history, their current situation, the child that connected them. "Now," he said slowly, "I'm beginning to think that perhaps I was asking the wrong question. Maybe life isn't about finding elegant solutions. Maybe it's about embracing the complexity and finding beauty in the mess." The philosophical turn surprised her, revealing a depth to Marcus's thinking that went beyond the strategic brilliance for which he was known. This was the man beneath the CEO, the person behind the public persona, thoughtful, evolving, capable of reconsidering long-held assumptions. "That's quite an evolution for someone who built an empire on controlling variables," she observed. A smile touched his lips, genuine and unguarded. "Parenthood seems to require a different approach. At least that's what all the books suggest." "You're reading parenting books?" The image of Marcus Reed, Billionaire CEO, poring over guides to infant care and child development was both incongruous and oddly endearing. "Research is the foundation of informed decision-making," he replied, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. "I prefer to be prepared." Eliza couldn't help but laugh, the tension of their serious conversation breaking. "Some things can't be prepared for, Marcus. Trust me on this." His answering smile transformed his face, creating a moment of genuine connection that transcended their complicated circumstances. "I'm beginning to understand that. And strangely, I find I'm almost looking forward to the unpredictability." As he left to take a business call, Eliza found herself contemplating this new version of Marcus Reed, the man who was cautiously embracing uncertainty, who was reading parenting books and planning how to protect her professional standing, who was revealing himself to be far more complex and adaptable than she had ever imagined. Perhaps, she thought, they were both evolving. She toward accepting help and sharing control, he toward finding value in the unplannable aspects of life. Perhaps this unexpected pregnancy, which had seemed like such a complication, was actually creating space for growth neither of them had anticipated. One variable at a time, they were finding their way forward. Not to an elegant solution, perhaps, but to something potentially more meaningful. A genuine partnership built on mutual respect, shared responsibility, and the gradual discovery of each other beyond professional roles and first impressions. For now, that felt like progress enough. The morning of Eliza's return to Pinnacle dawned clear and bright, a perfect late summer day that belied her inner turmoil. Standing before the mirror in her apartment, she had insisted on returning home once Dr. Winters cleared her for normal activity. She studied her reflection with critical eyes. At 18 weeks pregnant, her condition was becoming more difficult to conceal. The loose silk blouse she'd chosen skimmed over her slightly rounded abdomen, but anyone looking closely would notice the change in her silhouette. By the end of the day, after she and Marcus made their announcement, speculation would be replaced by certainty. "You can do this," she told her reflection, straightening her shoulders. "You've faced tougher challenges." But had she? In her professional life, Eliza had navigated corporate politics, market downturns, and ruthless competitors. She had built strategies that transformed business models and led teams through seemingly impossible deadlines. Yet none of those challenges had felt as personally exposing as walking into Pinnacle today, knowing that by day's end, her private life would become public knowledge. Her phone chimed with a text from Marcus. "Car downstairs whenever you're ready. No rush." The offer of transportation was practical. Her apartment was a 20-minute drive from Pinnacle headquarters, but it also represented something more significant. By arriving together, They would be making a statement before any official announcement. It was the first step in controlling the narrative, as Marcus had put it. Taking a deep breath, Eliza gathered her bag and headed downstairs. Marcus waited beside a sleek black SUV, dressed in his usual impeccable suit, but with an unusual tension evident in his posture. When he saw her, something in his expression softened. "Ready?" he asked simply. "As I'll ever be," she replied with a wry smile. The drive passed in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the day ahead. It wasn't until they were pulling into the private parking beneath the Pinnacle building that Marcus spoke again. "We don't have to do this today," he said, surprising her with the unexpected offer of delay. "If you need more time." "No," Eliza interrupted gently. "Today is right. The Nexus launch is next week. Better to address this now, before that takes center stage." He nodded, accepting her decision. "How do you want to handle it?" "I've scheduled a meeting with HR for 10 o'clock, but beyond that, the approach is up to you." The deference to her preferences touched Eliza deeply. Throughout this unexpected journey, Marcus had consistently respected her agency, offering support without imposing control. It was a quality she hadn't fully appreciated in their previous professional interactions, but which now seemed fundamental to who he was. "Let's meet with HR together," she decided. "Then I'd like to tell my direct team personally before any company-wide communication goes out." "Of course." He hesitated, then added, "And afterward, there will be questions, reactions. Some supportive, others perhaps less so. Afterward, we do our jobs," Eliza said firmly. "We demonstrate through actions rather than words that nothing fundamental has changed about our professional capabilities or commitment." A smile touched Marcus's lips, admiration evident in his gaze. "You're remarkable, you know that?" The unexpected compliment brought warmth to her cheeks. "I'm just practical. It's more than that." He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Your strength, your clarity of purpose, your refusal to be defined by circumstances rather than choices, these are rare qualities, Eliza. Qualities our child will be fortunate to inherit." The sincerity in his voice created a moment of connection that transcended their complicated history. This wasn't flattery or manipulation. It was genuine appreciation from someone who recognized and valued her essential character. "Thank you," she said simply, unable to articulate the complex emotions his words evoked. As they exited the car and headed toward the elevator, Eliza felt a strange calm settle over her. Whatever happened today, whatever challenges lay ahead in balancing career and motherhood, in creating a functional co-parenting relationship with Marcus, she would face them with the same determination and strategic thinking that had brought her this far. One variable at a time. The meeting with HR proceeded more smoothly than Eliza had anticipated. Marcus had clearly prepared the ground, ensuring that the focus remained on practical considerations: maternity leave policies, benefits adjustments, temporary redistribution of responsibilities during her absence, rather than on the personal aspects of their situation. Janice Winters, Pinnacle's veteran HR director, maintained professional composure throughout, though Eliza didn't miss the momentary widening of her eyes when Marcus stated matter-of-factly, "As you may have gathered, Eliza and I are expecting a child together in February." "I see," Janice had replied, recovering quickly. "Congratulations to you both. Let's discuss how we can ensure a smooth transition for your maternity leave, Eliza, and appropriate coverage for your responsibilities during that time." And just like that, the conversation had shifted to practical matters, the potential awkwardness of their unconventional situation subsumed by procedural details and policy reviews. By the end of the meeting, Eliza felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The first hurdle had been cleared without drama or judgment. Telling her team proved more emotionally challenging. Gathered in the conference room adjacent to her office, the 6 people who reported directly to her watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern as she closed the door and took her place at the head of the table. "Before we begin our regular project review," she said, keeping her voice steady, "I have some personal news to share that will affect our department in the coming months." 5 pairs of eyes focused intently on her face. The sixth, belonging to Vivian, who had been promoted to the team 3 months earlier, held knowledge and encouragement. "I'm pregnant," Eliza continued. Deciding directness was the best approach. 18 weeks along, with a due date in February. "I'll be taking maternity leave at that time, but until then, I'll continue leading the department and overseeing the Nexus launch as planned." A moment of silence followed her announcement, broken by Daniel, her senior analyst. "Congratulations, Eliza. That's wonderful news." Murmurs of agreement and congratulations followed, genuine if somewhat surprised. Then came the question she had been bracing for, from Tara, her most direct and sometimes tactless team member. "Will you be coming back after maternity leave? In the same capacity?" The question cut to the heart of what many women faced when announcing pregnancies in corporate environments. The unstated assumption that motherhood might diminish their professional commitment or capability. "Yes," Eliza said firmly. "My commitment to this team and to Pinnacle remains unchanged. Becoming a mother is adding to my life, not subtracting from my professional identity." Satisfaction flickered across Vivian's face at this response, while the others nodded with varying degrees of understanding. "There's one more thing you should know," Eliza continued. Knowing transparency was essential with her core team. "The child's father is Marcus Reed." This revelation landed with the impact she had expected. Widened eyes, a few audible gasps, exchanged glances of shock and speculation. Even Vivian, who knew this part already, seemed startled by her directness in disclosing it. "Marcus and I are not in a romantic relationship," Eliza clarified, wanting to establish boundaries around the personal aspects of the situation. "But we are committed to co-parenting and to maintaining our professional responsibilities to Pinnacle and to all of you. I'm sharing this information because I value transparency with my team, and because you deserve to hear it directly from me rather than through company gossip." For a moment, no one seemed to know how to respond. Then Vivian spoke up, her tone deliberately casual. "So, does this mean we get to call the CEO by his first name at department happy hours now?" The tension broke as laughter rippled around the table. Eliza smiled, grateful for her friend's ability to defuse awkwardness with humor. "I wouldn't recommend testing that theory," she advised dryly. "Now, shall we get back to the Nexus timeline?" And just like that, they transitioned back to business, the momentary disruption of her personal revelation absorbed into the ongoing flow of professional responsibilities. It wouldn't always be this smooth, Eliza knew. There would be adjustments, questions, perhaps even resentments as her pregnancy progressed and her availability changed. But this initial response from her core team gave her hope that her professional identity wouldn't be subsumed by her impending motherhood. By mid-afternoon, a carefully worded company-wide email had gone out, announcing Eliza's pregnancy and her continued leadership of strategic development, with a brief acknowledgement of Marcus's paternity and their shared commitment to Pinnacle's ongoing success. The message was clear in both what it said and what it didn't say. This was a personal development being handled professionally, with no drama or corporate intrigue attached. Still, Eliza wasn't naive enough to think the announcement wouldn't generate speculation and gossip. As she worked through the afternoon, she was acutely aware of glances in her direction, of conversations that stopped when she approached, of the subtle scrutiny that followed her through the office. It was exactly what she had feared when she decided to hide her pregnancy until after the Nexus launch, becoming the subject of workplace gossip, having her professional accomplishments overshadowed by her personal circumstances. The irony that her collapse had forced exactly the scenario she'd been trying to avoid wasn't lost on her. At 5 o'clock, a knock on her office door interrupted her review of the final Nexus testing protocols. Marcus stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Do you have a moment?" he asked. "Of course." She gestured to the chair across from her desk, noting the formal distance he maintained, appropriate given their workplace setting and the day's revelations. "How has it been?" he asked once the door was closed, his tone suggesting he understood exactly what she'd been experiencing. "About as expected," Eliza replied honestly. "Some genuine congratulations, some awkward avoidance, plenty of whispers when they think I can't hear." Marcus nodded, unsurprised. "It will settle down." People are naturally curious about the personal lives of their leaders, especially when those lives take unexpected turns. But ultimately, they care more about their own careers than about our private business. I hope you're right, she sighed, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability now that they were alone. I just hate feeling like I've become the pregnant executive instead of the architect of Nexus. You're both, Marcus pointed out gently, and more, just as I'm both CEO and expectant father, along with many other identities. People's tendency to fixate on a single aspect of someone else's life doesn't diminish the fullness of that life. The philosophical observation surprised her, revealing again the thoughtful person behind Marcus's efficient professional persona. These glimpses of his deeper nature had become more frequent during her stay at his home, creating a foundation of friendship that transcended their complicated history. When did you get so wise? She asked, a smile softening her words. I've always been wise, he replied with mock seriousness. You're just finally noticing. The shared moment of humor eased the tension of the day, reminding Eliza that whatever challenges lay ahead, she wasn't facing them alone. Marcus might not be her romantic partner, but he was proving to be a steadfast ally in navigating this unexpected journey. I actually came to invite you to dinner, he continued, his tone shifting back to casual. There's a new restaurant in Tribeca that's supposedly impossible to get into, but the chef is an old friend. I thought we might celebrate surviving day one of our public co-parenting adventure. The invitation caught Eliza off guard. During her recovery at his home, they had shared meals as a matter of practicality. This was different, a deliberate choice to spend time together outside of necessity. Won't that fuel speculation? She asked, genuinely curious about his thinking. Us dining together publicly after today's announcement? Probably, he acknowledged with a shrug. But people will speculate regardless of what we do. We might as well enjoy a good meal while they talk. His nonchalance about potential gossip represented a freedom Eliza had never permitted herself, the ability to act according to personal preference rather than careful calculation of others' perceptions. It was both unsettling and strangely liberating to consider adopting even a fraction of that approach. Okay, she decided, surprising herself with the ease of her acceptance. Dinner sounds nice. The restaurant was indeed exclusive, a small space with only 12 tables, each separated from the others by clever architectural elements that created an illusion of privacy without isolation. The chef, a tall woman with a shock of silver hair, greeted Marcus with genuine warmth before leading them to a corner table with views of both the open kitchen and the quiet street outside. Mira and I went to culinary school together, Marcus explained after they were seated. Before I decided technology was my true calling. You went to culinary school? Eliza couldn't hide her surprise at this previously unknown facet of his background. A smile touched his lips. For a year between undergrad and business school. My father considered it a waste of time, but it was the first decision I made purely for myself rather than for the family legacy. I had no idea you were interested in cooking. There's a lot we don't know about each other, he observed, echoing a comment from one of their evenings at his home. Despite our professional proximity and our current situation, the gentle acknowledgement of the unusual path that had brought them to this moment, colleagues to lovers to co-parents, all within the span of less than a year, created an opening for the kind of personal conversation they had begun to explore during her recovery. As the meal progressed through exquisite courses paired with wines, for Marcus, and sophisticated non-alcoholic concoctions, for Eliza, they found themselves sharing stories and perspectives that had little to do with Pinnacle or their impending parenthood. Marcus spoke of his year in culinary school and his ongoing love of cooking, a hobby he rarely had time to indulge. Eliza described her college years studying abroad, her passion for architectural photography, her dream of someday writing a book about women pioneers in technology. By the time dessert arrived, a deconstructed chocolate creation that the chef delivered personally with a wink at Marcus, Eliza realized they were having the kind of date they had skipped over in their unusual progression from professional acquaintances to expectant parents. The thought brought a flush to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature of the restaurant. What is it? Marcus asked, noticing her sudden self-consciousness. Nothing, she deflected, then reconsidered, deciding honesty was the foundation they needed to build upon. Actually, I was just thinking that this feels like a date, he finished when she hesitated. Yes, she met his gaze directly, curious about his perspective. Is that what this is? Marcus considered the question with characteristic thoroughness, neither rushing to confirm nor hurrying to deny. I'm not sure there's a conventional label for what we're doing, he said finally. We're getting to know each other as people rather than as professional roles. We're exploring whether the connection we felt that night 7 months ago was purely circumstantial or based on something more substantial. We're laying groundwork for a relationship that will need to sustain us through 2 decades of co-parenting. The thoughtfulness of his response, so different from the glib assurances or awkward deflections another man might have offered, reminded Eliza why she had been drawn to Marcus in the first place. His mind, his clarity, his ability to face complex situations directly, these qualities had attracted her long before physical proximity had sparked more immediate chemistry. And if it is a date? She pressed, surprising herself with her boldness. Would that complicate things further, or simplify them? A smile touched his lips, genuine and unguarded. I think that depends on how it goes. The subtle shift in atmosphere between them, from the careful distance of co-parents navigating a complex situation to the tentative possibility of something more personal, created a new awareness as they finished their meal and stepped out into the warm evening air. Walk for a bit? Marcus suggested, nodding toward the quiet streets of Tribeca, less crowded now that the dinner hour had passed. Eliza nodded, falling into step beside him. The city at night had always been one of her favorite environments. The softened edges, the pockets of light and shadow, the sense of possibility that lingered in the spaces between buildings. I've been thinking, Marcus said after they had walked in comfortable silence for a block, about what you asked earlier, whether this was a date. And I realized I've been approaching our situation with excessive caution, trying to respect your independence and avoid adding romantic complications to an already complex circumstance. That's considerate, Eliza acknowledged, curious where his thoughts were leading. But perhaps not entirely honest, he continued, surprising her. The truth is, Eliza, I've been drawn to you since long before that night in the office. Your mind, your determination, the way you see connections others miss. These things fascinated me from our first strategic planning session 2 years ago. The admission caught her off guard. In her own narrative of their relationship, physical attraction had momentarily overwhelmed professional boundaries that night 7 months ago, creating an anomaly rather than revealing an underlying pattern. You never indicated any personal interest, she said, thinking back over their interactions before that night. Of course not. You were a valued employee. I was your CEO. The power dynamics made any expression of personal interest inappropriate at best, potentially exploitative at worst. His principles, so clearly articulated, explained much about his behavior both before and after their night together. That's why I left that note. Not because what happened meant nothing, but because it meant something I didn't know how to reconcile with our professional relationship. They had stopped walking now, standing in the pool of light from a street lamp, the city's ambient noise creating a cocoon of privacy around their conversation. And now, Eliza asked, her heart beating faster despite her attempt at composure. What's changed? Everything, Marcus replied simply. The pregnancy has already altered our professional dynamic beyond repair. The careful boundaries we both maintained, have been irreversibly crossed. We're going to be parents together, regardless of any other aspect of our relationship. He paused, his gaze direct and unflinching. Which means the reasons I held back before no longer apply. We're already connected in the most profound way possible. The question now is whether we explore the full potential of that connection, or limit it to co-parenting alone. The clarity of his analysis, so characteristic of his approach to business challenges, now applied to the most personal of questions, created a strange intimacy between them. This was Marcus Reed stripped of corporate armor, offering not just vulnerability but a vision of possibility she hadn't allowed herself to consider. I don't know what to say, Eliza admitted, the strategic thinker momentarily at a loss for words. "You don't need to say anything right now," he assured her. "This isn't a business negotiation with a deadline. It's a conversation we can continue as we navigate everything else." A smile touched his lips, softening the seriousness of the moment. "One variable at a time, remember?" The reference to what had become their shared mantra eased the tension, reminding Eliza that whatever happened between them, whether they remained co-parents only or explored a deeper relationship, they had already established a foundation of mutual respect and genuine care. "One variable at a time," she agreed, returning his smile. As they resumed walking, now in the direction of where his car waited to take her home, Eliza felt a curious lightness despite the complexity of their situation. For months, she had approached her pregnancy as a problem to be managed, a complication to be minimized, a secret to be protected. Tonight, for the first time, she glimpsed the possibility that it might instead be the beginning of something unexpected but potentially wonderful. Not just the child growing within her, but a relationship built on genuine connection rather than circumstantial necessity. The week leading up to the Nexus launch passed in a blur of final preparations, media briefings, and technical checks. To Eliza's relief, the initial wave of gossip following their announcement subsided quickly, replaced by the more immediate excitement of what industry analysts were calling the most significant platform innovation of the year. Marcus had been true to his word, ensuring that Eliza received full credit for her vision and leadership, while simultaneously protecting her from the most stressful aspects of the launch process. It was a delicate balance, supporting without undermining, shielding without sidelining, and his skillful navigation of it deepened her appreciation for his emotional intelligence, a quality often overlooked in assessments of his business acumen. The night before the launch, Eliza worked late in her office, reviewing the presentation she would deliver to key clients and media the following morning. A knock at her door revealed Marcus, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, looking as focused as she felt. "Final preparations?" he asked, nodding toward her computer screen. "Just some tweaks to the demonstration flow," she confirmed. "Everything else is ready." He entered, taking the chair across from her desk. "The team has done exceptional work." "You've done exceptional work." "We all have," she acknowledged, including him in the praise. His personal involvement in the final stages of development had accelerated several key features, his technical background proving as valuable as his business leadership. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his gaze dropping briefly to her midsection, where her pregnancy was now unmistakable in the fitted dress she wore. "Surprisingly good," Eliza admitted. "The extra rest has helped, and apparently the second trimester really is easier than the first." "I'm glad." His expression softened with genuine concern. "And you're sure you're up for tomorrow? The full presentation, the media interviews?" "Absolutely," she assured him, touched by his consideration but determined to fulfill her professional role. "This is what I've been working toward for over a year. Wild horses couldn't keep me away." A smile touched his lips. "I never doubted your determination. Just wanted to make sure you know you have support if you need it." The simple assurance that help was available but not imposed, that her judgment was trusted, that her professional moment wouldn't be taken from her, exemplified what Eliza had come to appreciate most about Marcus's approach to their situation. He respected her agency even while offering protection, a balance few men in positions of power managed to achieve. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything these past few weeks. The way you've handled this, all of it has been," she searched for the right word, "remarkable." "I've just tried to do what's right," he replied, a hint of self-consciousness in his tone. "For you, for our child, for the company." Most people find it difficult to balance even two of those priorities, let alone all three. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering her observation. "Perhaps because they see them as inherently conflicting," he said finally. "I've come to believe they're more aligned than I once thought. Your well-being, our child's future, pinnacle success. These aren't separate concerns to be traded off against each other. They're interconnected parts of a whole." The philosophical turn reminded Eliza of their conversations during her recovery at his home, Those quiet evenings when the CEO had given way to the man, revealing depths of thought and feeling that his professional persona rarely displayed. That's a significant evolution from the Marcus Reed who wrote "Some equations have no elegant solutions," she observed with a gentle smile. "I'm learning," he acknowledged, returning her smile with one of his own. Slowly, perhaps, but learning nonetheless. The moment of connection between them, intellectual, emotional, rooted in shared experience and growing understanding, felt more intimate than their single night of physical passion had been. This was a different kind of closeness, built day by day through honest conversation and mutual support rather than momentary attraction. "We should both get some rest," Marcus said, breaking the spell as he rose from the chair. "Tomorrow's a big day." "Yes," Eliza agreed, saving her presentation and shutting down her computer. "The biggest." As they walked together toward the elevator, maintaining professional distance yet sharing an awareness that transcended corporate boundaries, Eliza felt a curious sense of completion. Whatever happened tomorrow with the Nexus launch, whatever developed between her and Marcus in the months ahead, whatever challenges parenthood brought to both their lives, they had already achieved something significant. A partnership based on respect, honesty, and genuine care. One variable at a time, they were creating something neither had planned but both now valued. Not an elegant solution, perhaps, but a meaningful one. The Nexus launch exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Industry analysts praised the platform's revolutionary approach to data integration. Early adopters reported efficiency improvements beyond initial estimates, and Pinnacle's stock price jumped 12% by closing bell. By any metric, it was an unqualified success. For Eliza, however, the most significant moment came not during her flawlessly delivered presentation or the enthusiastic client reception that followed, but in a quiet exchange backstage just before she stepped into the spotlight. "Ready?" Marcus had asked, adjusting his tie in the reflection of a darkened monitor. "Ready," she'd confirmed, smoothing her dress over her visible pregnancy, no longer hidden but incorporated into her professional presence. He turned to her then, his expression serious. "Whatever happens out there, though I have no doubt it will be brilliant, I want you to know something." "What's that?" "That watching you these past months, your strength, your vision, your ability to adapt to circumstances neither of us planned, has changed how I see everything." The uncharacteristic hesitation in his voice had caught her attention, revealing the personal significance of what might otherwise have sounded like professional praise. "You've shown me that control isn't the only path to success, that vulnerability can be a form of strength, that some of life's most meaningful developments can't be strategized or scheduled." The sincerity in his words had touched something deep within her, creating a moment of connection more powerful than any they had shared before. This wasn't just her CEO acknowledging her professional contribution, or even the father of her child offering personal support. This was a man of extraordinary achievement and self-discipline acknowledging that she had changed him, had opened pathways of thought and feeling he hadn't previously explored. "Thank you," she'd said simply, words inadequate to express the complex emotions his acknowledgement evoked. Then, in a gesture that bridged their professional partnership and personal connection, he'd offered his hand to lead her onto the stage, not taking over, not diminishing her moment, but standing beside her as they presented their shared vision to the world. Now, hours later, as the launch celebration wound down in Pinnacle's expansive lobby, Eliza found herself watching Marcus from across the room. He moved easily among investors and media representatives, his natural charisma enhanced by the day's success, yet she noticed how frequently his gaze sought her out, checking that she wasn't overextending herself, silently communicating shared triumph across the crowded space. "You two have developed quite the connection," Vivian observed, appearing at Eliza's side with a glass of sparkling water. "And I don't just mean the obvious." She nodded toward Eliza's pregnancy, now a known and accepted fact among the Pinnacle community. "It's complicated," Eliza replied, the standard response she'd given to similar observations over the past weeks. "Is it, though?" Vivian challenged gently. "From where I'm standing, it looks surprisingly straightforward. Two brilliant people who respect each other's minds, who are having a child together, who clearly enjoy each other's company. The only complication I see is your mutual reluctance to acknowledge what's developing between you. The directness of her friend's assessment caught Eliza off guard. Was it that obvious to outside observers? The gradual shift from professional collaboration to personal connection, from circumstantial co-parents to potential partners? We're taking things slowly, she said finally, acknowledging the underlying truth of Vivian's observation. One variable at a time. Vivian smiled at the phrase she'd heard Eliza use before. Well, from a statistical perspective, I'd say the variables are trending in a clear direction. Before Eliza could respond, Marcus approached, his expression warm as he joined their conversation. The board is ecstatic, he reported. Whitfield just called Nexus the most significant platform innovation since cloud computing. High praise from a man who usually communicates in grunts and frowns, Vivian commented with a grin. Well-deserved praise, Marcus corrected, his gaze fixed on Eliza with unmistakable admiration. This is your vision realized. Our vision, she amended, acknowledging his contributions to the final product. The team's vision. And on that collaborative note, I'll leave you two to your mutual admiration society, Vivian said with a knowing smile, slipping away to join another group of colleagues. Left alone in their small pocket of relative privacy amid the celebration, Eliza and Marcus shared a moment of quiet satisfaction. Not just in the day's professional success, but in the personal journey that had brought them to this point. How are you feeling? Marcus asked, his concern genuine. It's been a long day. Tired but exhilarated, Eliza admitted, and ready to sit down somewhere quiet for a while. Understanding immediately, Marcus guided her toward a secluded seating area near the building's impressive atrium, shielded from the main celebration by a living wall of tropical plants. As they settled onto a comfortable bench, the sounds of the party muted by distance and vegetation, Eliza felt the day's tension begin to ease from her shoulders. You were magnificent today, Marcus said quietly. Every aspect of your presentation, your handling of the technical questions, your media interviews, flawless. Thank you. She accepted the praise without deflection, having learned through their evolving relationship that diminishing her achievements didn't serve either of them. It felt good to see everything come together after so many months of work. And to do it on your terms, he added perceptively, as a visionary leader who happens to be pregnant, rather than as a pregnant woman who happens to work in tech. The distinction was precisely what she had feared losing when her condition became known. Her professional identity subsumed by her biological reality. That it hadn't happened, that she had maintained her standing and authority throughout the launch process, owed much to Marcus's unwavering support and public acknowledgement of her leadership. I couldn't have done it without you, she acknowledged, meeting his gaze directly. Not just the technical aspects, but the personal navigation. The way you've helped reshape the narrative around our situation. You give me too much credit, he demurred. You would have found a way regardless. You're nothing if not resourceful. Perhaps, she conceded with a small smile, but it would have been a much harder path alone. The simple acknowledgement that his presence in her life had made a positive difference, that his support had mattered, seemed to touch something deep within Marcus. For a man accustomed to being valued primarily for his business acumen or financial resources, recognition of his personal impact carried different weight. I've been thinking, he said after a moment, his tone shifting to something more tentative than his usual decisive manner, about what happens next. For us. The question had been hovering between them since their dinner in Tribeca, acknowledged but not fully explored amid the final preparations for the Nexus launch. Now, with that milestone successfully behind them, the space for personal considerations had expanded. What are you thinking? Eliza asked, curious about his perspective. Marcus was quiet for a moment, organizing his thoughts with characteristic thoroughness. I'm thinking that we've established a foundation of mutual respect and genuine care, that we work well together, both professionally and in addressing personal challenges, that we share fundamental values about integrity, excellence, and responsibility. He paused, then continued with careful honesty. And I'm thinking that I'd like to explore whether these elements might support something beyond co-parenting. A relationship that encompasses all aspects of connection, not just our shared responsibility for our child. The directness of his proposition, framed not in emotional terms but in the logical assessment of compatible qualities, was quintessentially Marcus. Yet beneath the analytical approach, Eliza sensed genuine feeling, hope, vulnerability, the willingness to risk rejection for the possibility of something meaningful. "Are you asking me on a date, Marcus Reed?" she asked, a smile softening the question. "I believe I'm suggesting a series of dates," he clarified, returning her smile with one of his own. "A methodical exploration of our compatibility in contexts beyond professional collaboration and impending parenthood." "Methodical exploration," she repeated, amused by his characteristic approach. "That sounds very scientific." "I prefer thorough," he countered, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. "Some matters deserve careful consideration rather than impulsive action." The subtle reference to their night together 7 months ago, the impulsive connection that had created their current circumstance, hung between them, acknowledged but not regretted. "I agree," Eliza said softly, her hand finding his on the bench between them. "Some things are worth taking slowly, exploring fully, understanding completely." The relief in his expression was palpable, as if he had genuinely feared her rejection despite the growing closeness between them. "So you're open to this exploration?" "I am," she confirmed, surprising herself with the certainty of her response. "One variable at a time." His fingers interlaced with hers, the simple contact conveying more than words could express. "One variable at a time," he agreed. As they sat together in their quiet corner of the celebration, hands linked in tacit acknowledgement of the path they had chosen to explore, Eliza felt a sense of rightness that transcended logical analysis. Their journey had begun with an unexpected night of connection, continued through months of separation and secrecy, evolved through crisis and revelation, and now opened toward possibilities neither had anticipated when those 2 pink lines had appeared on the pregnancy test. Not an elegant solution, perhaps, but a profoundly human one, messy, unplanned, challenging, and potentially more meaningful than any carefully structured life plan could have provided. In the months that followed, Eliza and Marcus navigated their evolving relationship with the same thoughtful intentionality they brought to their professional collaboration. Weekend dates became regular dinners, which gradually transitioned to shared evenings at his home or hers. Conversations about work and the baby expanded to include dreams, fears, childhood memories, and future hopes. Physical intimacy returned, now deepened by emotional connection and mutual understanding. By the time their daughter arrived, Sophia Grace Reed, 7 pounds 4 ounces, with her father's gray eyes and her mother's determined chin, they had established not just a functional co-parenting arrangement but a genuine partnership built on respect, trust, and growing love. Standing in the hospital room, watching Marcus hold their newborn with a mixture of terror and wonder on his usually composed face, Eliza felt the final pieces of their unexpected journey fall into place. This man, who had once seemed the embodiment of controlled success, now surrendered completely to the tiny being in his arms, his vulnerability as beautiful as his strength had always been. "She's perfect," he whispered, looking up at Eliza with eyes suspiciously bright. "Absolutely perfect." "She is," Eliza agreed, her own heart so full it seemed impossible to contain the emotion. "Our most elegant solution." Understanding immediately, Marcus smiled at the reference to his long-ago note. "Not elegant," he corrected gently, "but infinitely more beautiful than any solution I could have planned." As he carefully returned Sophia to Eliza's arms, their daughter nestled against her mother's heart, Marcus reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I had planned to do this differently," he admitted, a rare uncertainty in his voice. "A carefully orchestrated moment after you'd recovered, with proper ambience and preparation. But seeing you now, seeing her, I can't imagine a more perfect time." Eliza's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a stunning emerald-cut diamond set in platinum, elegant in its simplicity. "I've learned many things from you, Eliza Morgan," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. That the most meaningful developments can't be scheduled or controlled. That vulnerability is not weakness but courage. That sometimes the most beautiful outcomes arise from the most unexpected beginnings. He took her free hand, his gaze never leaving hers. I've learned that life's greatest joys often come disguised as complications, and that some equations don't need elegant solutions. They just need love, patience, and commitment. Tears filled Eliza's eyes as she understood where his words were leading. I love you, he continued simply, not just as the mother of our child, but as the woman who challenged my assumptions, who showed me a different way to see the world, who made me want to be better than I was. I want to build a life with you. Messy, unpredictable, and infinitely more meaningful than the controlled existence I once valued. With Sophia sleeping peacefully against her chest, Eliza felt the culmination of their extraordinary journey, from colleagues to unexpected parents to partners in the truest sense. Will you marry me, Eliza? Marcus asked, the question direct and unembellished, just like the man himself. Yes, she answered without hesitation, her heart too full for elaborate responses. Yes, I will, as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then leaned forward to kiss her with exquisite gentleness. Eliza marveled at the path that had brought them here. From that night of unexpected connection, through months of secrecy and fear, through collapse and revelation, through professional triumph and personal growth, each step, each challenge, each moment of vulnerability had led to this perfect culmination. They were married 6 months later in an intimate ceremony in the garden of what was now their shared home. Sophia, dressed in a tiny white dress that matched her mother's elegant gown, was the guest of honor, passed between adoring grandparents while her parents exchanged vows beneath an arch of white roses. I take you not as the completion of my life, Marcus promised, his voice steady and sure, but as the partner who makes me more than I could ever be alone. I promise to value your independence as much as your presence, to support your dreams as fervently as my own, to build with you a family where strength and vulnerability are equally honored. I take you not as the solution to an equation, Eliza responded, her eyes bright with unshed tears, but as the variable that transformed every calculation. I promise to embrace the unpredictability of our journey, to trust in our shared resilience, to remember always that the most beautiful outcomes often arise from the most unexpected beginnings. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, their daughter cooing happily in her grandmother's arms, the gathered guests, family, friends, and yes, even the Pinnacle board members, witnessed the culmination of a love story unlike any other. Not a fairy tale of love at first sight, but a more complex, more human narrative of two people finding their way to each other through challenge and growth, through professional respect and personal revelation. 1 year later, as Eliza and Marcus celebrated Sophia's 2nd birthday and awaited the arrival of their 2nd child, they often reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them together. The framed note, "Some equations have no elegant solutions," hung in Marcus's home office, a reminder of how far they had come from that morning after, when both had believed their connection was a complication best avoided rather than the beginning of their greatest joy. Do you ever regret it? Eliza asked one evening as they sat in the garden, watching Sophia toddle determinedly across the grass. The way it all happened, the public speculation, the disruption to your carefully ordered life. Marcus considered the question with characteristic thoroughness, his arm warm around her shoulders. Not for a moment, he said finally, his gaze moving from their daughter to his wife, love evident in every line of his face. Some disruptions aren't complications to be managed. They're opportunities to discover what truly matters. As Sophia reached them, arms outstretched in triumph at her successful journey across the lawn, both parents reached for her simultaneously, their hands meeting in the shared joy of supporting their daughter's first steps. In that simple moment of family connection, the truth of their journey was perfectly crystallized. That sometimes life's most beautiful outcomes arise not from careful planning but from embracing the unexpected, from finding courage in vulnerability, from transforming complications into opportunities for growth and love. Not an elegant solution, perhaps, but an infinitely more meaningful one. If the story touched your heart, Please hit that like button and subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced how life's greatest complications can become its greatest blessings? How an unexpected challenge transformed into an unexpected joy? Remember, my friends, that sometimes our most carefully constructed plans fall apart to make way for something even more beautiful than we could have imagined. Sometimes the equations of our lives don't need elegant solutions. They just need courage, vulnerability, and the willingness to embrace the unexpected journey. Until next time, this is Mr. Harrison, reminding you that the most meaningful love stories aren't perfect. They're real.